It was a breezy afternoon in the heart of Philadelphia, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted out of a small corner cafe. Inside, the usual hum of conversation and clinking cups created a warm, inviting atmosphere. Barron Trump sat at a small table near the window, his tall frame slightly hunched over a thick book. He wasn't trying to draw attention, just a plain hoodie and jeans were his attempt to blend into the crowd. After all, he was the youngest son of a former president, and life for him had often been a whirlwind of public appearances and scrutiny. But here, among strangers sipping lattes and scrolling through their phones, he felt an unusual sense of anonymity. Barron had come to the cafe for one simple reason: a quiet moment to himself. He wasn't expecting any kind of confrontation, but life, as usual, had different plans. A sudden, sharp voice broke through the cafe's hum. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" The man standing a few feet away from Barron was in his late 40s, with a weathered face and fiery eyes. His clothes, though not shabby, had the unmistakable wear of someone who'd seen hard times. His tone was confrontational, his body tense. For a moment, Barron froze, not out of fear, but surprise. This wasn't something he'd anticipated when he'd come to this quiet cafe. The tension in the room thickened. Eyes turned towards Barron and the angry man, uncertain of what would happen next. "You've got everything handed to you on a silver platter," the man continued. "Do you even know what it's like to struggle?" The other patrons exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Even the barista hesitated, her hand hovering near the phone. But Barron, calm and collected, didn't flinch. Slowly, he closed his book, placed it on the table, and looked up at the man. "Sir," he said quietly, "I'm not sure what's upset you, but maybe we could talk about it." The man scoffed loudly. "Talk? You want to talk? What could you possibly have to say that someone like me would want to hear?" The cafe fell eerily silent, the patrons holding their breaths. But instead of matching the man's aggression, Barron did something that no one expected. He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed yet attentive, as if inviting the man into the conversation. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. For a moment, the man seemed taken aback, still standing, fists clenched, glaring at Barron. "Why would I want to sit with someone like you?" he sneered. "You're just another spoiled kid who'll never know what it's like to live in the real world." The tension was thick. The patrons shifted uneasily. The barista made a subtle move, as if considering whether to intervene. But Barron didn't back down. "Maybe you're right," he admitted. "I haven't walked in your shoes. But if you sit down, maybe you can tell me what that's like." The man faltered. His aggressive posture weakened, but his anger remained. He leaned in closer, his voice low and full of sarcasm. "You think I owe you my story? You think that'll make you feel better about yourself?" Barron didn't flinch. "I think everyone has a story that deserves to be heard," he said simply. The words hung in the air. The man hesitated. His tough exterior was crumbling, but he was still unsure. After a long, tense silence, he grabbed the back of the chair and dragged it noisily across the floor, dropping into the seat across from Barron. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight, but his eyes still scanned Barron, searching for any sign of weakness. "Fine," the man muttered. "You want to hear about the real world? I'll tell you." And so, the man began to speak. What came next wasn't just a story. It was a revelation. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before he spoke. His voice was quieter now, but still filled with bitterness. "You look at me and see someone angry for no reason, but you don't know what it's like to lose everything." The cafe was silent now, save for the faint hiss of the espresso machine in the background. The man's voice cracked as he continued. "I had a job, a family, a decent life. But then the factory I worked at shut down. Just like that, gone. Hundreds of us left with nothing but promises they'd relocate us. Promises that never came true." He paused, his eyes glistening, and for the first time, Barron saw the raw pain beneath the man's anger. "I tried to hold it together for my wife and kids, worked whatever odd jobs I could find. But when you're scraping by, it doesn't take much to break you. My wife, she left, took the kids with her, said she couldn't live like this anymore. The words hit hard. Barron didn't respond immediately, just listened. The man's voice trembled. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a room and know everyone's looking at you, judging you, thinking you're nothing? That's my life now. Every single day. Barron's eyes softened. He could see the weight of the man's words, and in that moment, something changed in the cafe. A woman at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably, her coffee cup suddenly much more interesting. Barron didn't rush to respond. He let the man's pain linger in the air, heavy and real. And then, the man said something that truly shook the room. And then I see someone like you, he said, his voice rising slightly. Sitting here with your fancy clothes, reading a book like you don't have a care in the world. It makes me mad because no matter what I do, I'll never have what you have. Barron didn't flinch. He didn't try to defend himself. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice steady but sincere. I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, he said, but I do know what it's like to feel judged. To feel like people have already decided who you are before you've even said a word. The man's face twitched. Barron's words had struck a nerve. But instead of responding with more anger, the man shifted in his chair, loosening his defensive posture just a little. Barron continued, his tone calm yet powerful. You might think I've got it easy because of my name. And in some ways, you're right. I've never had to worry about a roof over my head or food on the table. But that doesn't mean I don't know what it's like to feel misunderstood. The man's posture shifted. His arms uncrossed, his face softened, just slightly. He didn't say anything, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. I'm not saying my struggles are the same as yours, Barron continued. They're not. But pain is pain. Feeling like you're invisible or like you'll never be understood. That's something we all face, no matter where we come from. The silence in the cafe was now so thick it was almost tangible. Even the barista had stopped in her tracks, her tray of cups forgotten. The room was filled with an unspoken understanding. Barron leaned back slightly, giving the man space to absorb what he had just said. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm not here to change your mind. I just want to understand. Because I think we're all carrying things that no one else sees. And maybe we'd be a little kinder to each other if we did. The man's jaw tightened again, but this time it was different. He exhaled sharply, releasing something heavy that he had been holding on to for far too long. You really believe that? He asked, his voice quieter, almost uncertain. I do, Barron said, with the same unwavering calm. And I think maybe deep down, you do too. Otherwise, you wouldn't have told me your story. For a long moment, the man didn't speak. His tough exterior had cracked, just a little. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes scanning the room as if he had just noticed how many people had been watching. And then, something truly unexpected happened. The man reached across the table, extending his hand toward Barron. Barron hesitated for only a moment before taking it. I'm sorry, the man said, his voice thick with emotion, for judging you before I even knew you. Barron smiled, his expression warm. I'm sorry if I ever gave you a reason to feel that way. The handshake lingered for a moment, and then the man stood up, smoothing his shirt awkwardly. He glanced around the cafe, his face flushed with an emotion none of the patrons had seen before. I think I owe everyone here an apology too, he said, his voice carrying across the room. I came in here angry, but this kid... He looked at Barron. He reminded me that sometimes we've just got to listen. The cafe erupted in quiet applause, not loud or showy, but sincere. The man nodded, visibly moved, and made his way to the door. Before he left, he looked back at Barron and said simply, Thank you. And just like that, he was gone. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted. What had started as a tense confrontation turned into a shared moment of understanding, leaving everyone who witnessed it questioning their own assumptions. Barron returned to his seat, picked up his book, and took a sip of his now cold tea. But before he could retreat back into his solitude, a woman from a nearby table approached him. She looked to be in her 60s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Young man," she said softly, "I just want to say what you did back there was remarkable. You didn't have to listen to him, but you did. And I think you reminded all of us that sometimes kindness is all it takes to turn things around." Barron nodded, his expression humble. "Thank you, ma'am. I think we all just need someone to hear us out sometimes." She smiled and patted him gently on the shoulder before returning to her table. Barron sat back, reflecting on the unexpected encounter. It had started as a confrontation, but it ended as something far more powerful, a moment of connection. Sometimes, all it took was listening. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the importance of listening and understanding each other.